The reservoir behind Cascade Ridge Dam held 11 billion gallons of water, and on a quiet night you could feel the pressure of it through the concrete under your boots, a low, constant hum, like the dam itself was breathing. I'd felt that hum every working day for 41 years, since the summer I turned 23, and my own father, who'd worked this same dam before me, put a torque wrench in my hand and told me the only thing worth knowing about hydroelectric engineering: water doesn't negotiate. My name is Ezra Calloway, Chief Gatekeeper and Senior Hydraulic Displacement Analyst for the Bureau of River Regulation, Cascade Division. That title meant nothing to the new operator. To Meridian Grid Dynamics, I was a line item on a modernization budget, an old man who still walked the spillway catwalks with a flashlight and a logbook when the whole system was supposed to run itself now, clean and silent and self-correcting, the way the promotional materials promised. Meridian had installed something called SpillSync 18 months earlier, a predictive AI system that managed gate openings across 4 connected reservoirs in the basin, adjusting in real time for rainfall telemetry, satellite snowpack imaging, and downstream demand curves. The engineers who built it were proud of it, and I understood why. It was fast. It was elegant. It could process 100 years of historical flow data and produce a gate schedule in under a second that would have taken my generation 3 days of manual calculation. On paper, it was almost always right. Almost. My daughter Naomi ran the entire modernization program. She was 39, sharp as broken glass, with her mother's steady eyes and my own stubbornness turned against me instead of for me. She had not called me Dad in a work setting since the day she made vice president, 4 years back. In the control room, I was Mr. Calloway, or sometimes just Ezra, said in the clipped tone you'd use for any other aging piece of infrastructure that hadn't been decommissioned yet. I want to be fair to her, because this isn't a simple story, and she was never a simple villain in it, no matter how the next few weeks made her look. The trouble started building slow, the way real trouble on a river system always does, not with an alarm, but with a pattern nobody was quite watching the right way. February had been unusually cold that year, locking a heavier snowpack into the high country than the basin had seen in a decade. Then March came in warm and wet, all at once, the kind of rapid thaw that turns a mountain range into a faucet somebody forgot to turn off gradually. By the second week of March, snowpack readings were sitting at 140% of normal, and the reservoir behind Cascade Ridge was climbing 2 full inches a day. SpillSync noticed the trend before any of the human operators did. That was the system working exactly as designed. It began recommending incremental gate openings across the basin, spreading the pressure release across all 4 dams to keep any single reservoir from approaching its flood stage ceiling. It was, on the level the system was built to understand, a genuinely intelligent response. I walked Gate 4 personally on a Thursday afternoon, the way I'd walked every gate on this dam every spring since 1987, rain or shine, whether anyone asked me to or not. It wasn't in my job description anymore, not officially. Meridian's org chart had my role listed as Legacy Systems Consultant, part-time, which was their polite way of saying they hadn't figured out how to get rid of me yet without a fight from the operators' union. The rubber compression seal along the base of Gate 4 showed hairline cracking when I ran my thumb along it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would trip a sensor. SpillSync's monitoring array measured flow rate, vibration frequency, and hydraulic pressure differential, real numbers, useful numbers, but it had no way to measure the slow, patient fatigue of 40-year-old compression rubber losing its elasticity after 4 decades of freeze-thaw cycles in cold mountain water. That kind of knowledge didn't live in a sensor. It lived in a pair of hands that had touched that exact rubber 100 times across 4 decades and knew, the way you know an old friend's voice on the phone before they say their name, when something was different. I flagged it. I filed the report the old way, on a paper form that still existed only because I'd refused to let the last 3 digital migrations retire it, and I photographed the seal and sent the image to Naomi directly, along with a note, Gate 4 seal showing accelerated wear. Recommend manual inspection before any full capacity opening this season. She called that evening, and I could hear the open plan office behind her, phones ringing, someone laughing too loud near her desk. It's cosmetic wear, Dad. Priya's team ran your photo through the structural model. The seal's rated for another 6 years minimum, even under worst-case flow projections. Priya Anand was Naomi's director of automated compliance, 33 years old, careful, and in my experience the only person left in that building who still asked me questions instead of simply informing me of conclusions. I liked her, actually, more than I ever told Naomi. The models rated it off manufacturer spec sheets for that compound, I said. Generic degradation curves. It doesn't know this specific batch of rubber, installed in 1998, sitting in this specific reservoir at this specific elevation, through 11 winters colder than the historical average. A model can't smell fatigue, Naomi. I can. We can't run a regional power grid on your sense of smell. You can't run one safely without it either. Not yet. Maybe not for a long while. She was quiet for a second, and in that silence I heard something I recognized, because I'd felt it myself once, decades ago, arguing with my own father about whether the new SCADA telemetry system could be trusted over a hand-cranked pressure gauge. It's a particular kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of being caught between believing in progress and being terrified of what progress might cost if you're wrong about how ready it is. I'll flag it for the June maintenance window, she said finally. That's the earliest I can pull a crew off the automation rollout without blowing our renewal timeline. June's after the thaw peaks, Naomi. That's backwards. It's what I can do. She hung up before I could say anything else, and I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, watching rain streak down the window, and I understood something about my daughter that I hadn't let myself understand before. She wasn't ignoring me out of arrogance. She was ignoring me because Meridian's contract renewal, due that autumn, was tied to a single hard number written into the state agreement, 18% more power delivered to the regional grid by October, with 0 days of unplanned downtime across the basin. And beneath that number sat a memory she carried the same way I carried mine, the summer she was 22, home from college, watching the Millbrook paper mill lay off 200 workers during a drought-driven power rationing crisis that the old manual gate systems, my systems, hadn't been fast enough to prevent. She'd watched grown men she'd known her whole childhood pack up toolboxes and leave town. She believed, with the same stubborn certainty I believed in the smell of old rubber, that automation was the only thing standing between towns like Millbrook and another decade like that one. We weren't fighting about a gate seal. We were fighting about which fear got to run the dam. 10 days later, the reservoir gauge crossed a threshold that triggered SpillSync's next recommendation: open gate 4 to 60% capacity ahead of a forecasted storm surge, to create headroom before an additional 2 inches of rainfall arrived over the following 48 hours. It was, by every metric the system tracked, the correct call. It was also the exact scenario I'd been warning about for 3 weeks. I drove out to the dam that morning and found Naomi already there, standing in the control room in a rain-damp coat, reviewing the recommendation with Priya and a younger engineer I didn't recognize. You're not authorized to override an active SpillSync recommendation without director sign-off, Naomi said, before I'd even taken my coat off. Someone had clearly warned her I was coming. I'm not here to override anything. I'm here to walk the gate before you open it to 60%. That's still within my consulting scope, unless you've changed that too. She looked at Priya. Priya looked at her tablet. The pre-opening structural check ran clean 2 hours ago, Priya said, carefully. Vibration signature, hydraulic pressure, seal integrity sensor, all nominal. Your seal integrity sensor measures acoustic resonance across the whole gate assembly, I said. It's designed to catch gross structural failure, not a 6-inch section of degraded rubber sitting exactly where I told you it was 3 weeks ago. Dad, we've had this conversation. We've had part of it. We haven't had the part where I actually get to walk out there before you open that gate to 60% capacity during a storm surge. The younger engineer, I later learned his name was Devon, fresh out of a systems engineering program, the kind of confident that only comes from never having watched water win an argument with concrete, cut in before Naomi could answer. With respect, sir, SpillSync's confidence interval on this recommendation is 94%. That's about as certain as physical systems modeling gets. 94% isn't certainty, son. It's a number somebody felt good enough about to put on a dashboard. The 6% it doesn't account for is usually the part that gets people's attention. Naomi rubbed her eyes, and for just a second I saw the exhaustion under the executive composure, the 15 years of work riding on this renewal, the countdown clock on her career that I don't think she'd ever said out loud to anyone, maybe not even to herself. Fine, she said. Walk it. You've got 20 minutes before I need to greenlight the sequence. Storm's not waiting for either of us. I want to tell you I found something dramatic on that walk. I didn't, not that day. The seal looked the same as it had 3 weeks earlier, cracked, worn, still holding, still within whatever margin of safety a piece of 40-year-old rubber could claim to have. I came back and told Naomi as much, and she opened the gate to 60%, and the storm passed, and the reservoir held, and for about 11 days it looked like I'd simply been an old man clinging to caution that the world had outgrown. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think it matters. I wasn't right because I had some infallible gift. I was right because I understood that a system under sustained, repeated stress doesn't fail on the first stress event, or the fifth. It fails on the one that happens to land on the exact moment the accumulated fatigue finally crosses its threshold. 40 years on a river teaches you that patience is not the same thing as being wrong. The night it happened was a Sunday, 3 weeks after that first walk, and I was home, which is its own particular kind of guilt I still carry every spring. The basin had taken on another 2 feet of rapid snowmelt in the preceding week. SpillSync, following its own optimization logic, had been cycling Gate 4 open and closed repeatedly to manage the flow, a pattern the system calculated as efficient, distributing hydraulic stress evenly across the gate's operating cycle. What the system didn't calculate, because no sensor was built to measure it, was that repeated cycling puts a very specific kind of mechanical fatigue on an aging compression seal, not steady pressure, but flexing, opening and closing, like bending a paperclip back and forth until the metal remembers it wants to break. I got the call at 11:40 p.m. from Halvorsen, a night operator I'd trained myself 20 years earlier, whispering into the phone like the dam itself might overhear him. Ezra. Gate 4's making a sound I've never heard it make. Sounds like a ship's hull working in heavy seas. I was in my truck in 4 minutes, driving too fast down a wet mountain road I could have driven blind, because in a sense I had, 100 times, in weather worse than this. By the time I reached the control room, the readouts were still green across the board. SpillSync's dashboard showed flow rates within acceptable parameters, gate position confirmed and stable, 0 fault codes logged. The system believed, with total sincerity, that everything was fine, because the system was only listening to sensors that measured volume and pressure differential, and those numbers looked exactly like they were supposed to look. I heard it the moment I stepped onto the catwalk. A groan, low and metallic, rising and falling with the rhythm of the water pressing against it. I had heard that exact sound exactly once before in my life, 39 years earlier, at our sister facility on the North Fork River, in the hours before Gate 4 there failed catastrophically and sent a wall of water through 6 miles of farmland. Nobody died that night on the North Fork, by luck and a fast evacuation more than by design, but 3 families lost everything they'd built, and the federal inquiry that followed produced a permanent safety exclusion governing every dam in this river basin, an exclusion that had sat, unread by anyone but me, in a records office filing cabinet for nearly 4 decades. Emergency stop, I said, walking into the control room dripping rain onto the floor. Full manual override on gate 4. Now. Priya was on shift. She looked at her screen, then at me, then back at her screen, and I watched her run the calculation every good employee under pressure runs in half a second. What happens to me if I'm wrong, against what happens to everyone downstream if I'm right and I don't act. The system shows nominal pressure differential across the full assembly, she said, but her voice had already started to shake. If I override without a logged structural cause, and the audit board flags this as an unnecessary shutdown during a supply-critical window, that's on my record, Mr. Calloway. Naomi specifically instructed the night shift not to. Priya. Stop looking at the screen. Listen to the gate. She listened. I watched her face change in real time, the way a person's face changes when their body recognizes danger a half second before their training catches up and gives them permission to act on it. She hit the override. The gate's massive hydraulic arms locked mid-motion with a shudder that ran up through the floor and into my boots, groaning hard against the accumulated strain, and for 11 full seconds nobody in that control room breathed. Then, slowly, the sound eased. Stabilized. Held. I calculated it later, that night, with the same slide rule I've carried in my coat pocket since 1985, because some numbers I still trust more coming from my own hand than from any dashboard. The seal failure that had been building toward completion, the pressure differential the sensors had confidently called nominal, would have opened a breach in gate 4 wide enough, at that flow rate, to send 4 feet of floodwater through the town of Millbrook Flats within approximately 90 minutes. Not a catastrophe on the scale of North Fork. Something smaller, in some ways, and in other ways worse, because it would have happened to a town that had been told, repeatedly and with total confidence, that the new system had made this kind of thing impossible. Naomi arrived at the dam a little after 1 in the morning, still in the coat she must have grabbed off a hook on her way out the door, furious in the specific way people get furious when they're actually frightened underneath it. You triggered an unauthorized override during an active supply window, she said, in front of the full night crew, her voice carrying that particular edge she'd inherited from her mother. Do you understand what that's going to cost the renewal timeline if the board decides Priya panicked on your say-so? I understand it's going to cost less than what would have happened if she hadn't. You don't know that. You're going off a sound and a slide rule, Dad, against a system with a 94% confidence interval and 18 months of clean operational data behind it. Then come look at the seal with me. Right now. In the rain, if you have to. And if I'm wrong, I will stand in this control room and tell every person on this crew that I overrode a working system out of nothing but an old man's nostalgia, and I will resign my consulting position tonight. She stared at me for a long moment, rain running down both our faces, and something in her expression told me she was more afraid of being right than being wrong, because being right meant admitting how close the number on her dashboard had come to being catastrophically incomplete. We walked out to gate 4 together. The seal had torn 6 inches along its base, the rubber peeled back like old paint, water still weeping through the gap in a thin, steady thread despite the gate now holding fully closed. Another 15, maybe 20 minutes at that flow cycle, and the tear would have run the full length of the seal, and gate 4 would not have held at all. Naomi didn't say anything for a long time. She crouched down in the rain, in her ruined work coat, and put her hand flat against the torn rubber the way I'd taught her to check a seal when she was 19 years old and still thought she might follow me into this work before the engineering scholarship changed her direction. I don't think either of us said a word for almost a full minute. The model was wrong, she finally said, quietly, not to me exactly. More to herself. The model wasn't wrong about what it measured. It was incomplete about what it didn't know to measure. That's a different kind of wrong. It's the kind you can actually fix. The federal inquiry took 11 days. I testified with the North Fork exclusion document in hand, an actual sheared bolt fragment from that 1987 failure, kept in a lockbox in the dam's records office for 39 years because I'd personally made sure it never got discarded during any of the 3 digital modernization cleanouts that had come before this one. Each time someone young and well-meaning had looked at a box of old paper and old steel and asked why we were still keeping it. The exclusion required manual seal inspection on any gate assembly over 30 years old before full capacity openings during rapid thaw or repeated cycling conditions. Spill Sync's engineering team hadn't known the exclusion existed, because it had never been digitized. It lived only in a paper filing system that predated the basin's first database migration by over 20 years, in a building nobody had thought to search before declaring the old records fully migrated. Meridian's contract renewal was delayed 6 months, pending a full manual audit of every gate seal across all 4 reservoirs in the basin. It cost the company real money, millions, eventually, once the audit uncovered 2 more aging seals at the North Fork and Ashford facilities showing similar fatigue patterns Spill Sync's models hadn't flagged. It cost Naomi, specifically, the promotion she'd spent 15 years working toward. The State Oversight Board wanted a new governance structure in place before approving any further phase of automation rollout across the basin, and Naomi's name was the one attached to the incident report, for better and for worse. I want to tell you this story ends with my daughter hugging me in the rain and telling me I'd been right all along. It doesn't, not exactly, and I think that's more honest than if it did. She was proven right that automation could safely carry the overwhelming majority of the operational load. The inquiry's final report was clear on that point, and Spill Sync remained in operation across the basin, refined and expanded, in fact, over the following 2 years. I was proven right that it couldn't yet be trusted to carry all of it alone, not without a permanent, unautomatable human check built into the system by law rather than left to anyone's discretion. Both of those things were true at once, and both of them cost my daughter something she'd worked 15 years to build, and she was not able to forgive me easily for being the reason, even while she understood, somewhere underneath the anger, that I had been correct. We didn't speak, beyond logistics, for 4 months. Priya still works the night shift, 3 years on now. She calls me sometimes, still, when a gate makes a sound she doesn't fully recognize, and I still drive out, at 74 years old, in the middle of the night, because some sounds only mean something to the people who've spent 4 decades learning what they cost. Naomi and I had dinner 2 weeks ago. The first real dinner, just the 2 of us, in a long while. She didn't apologize for the 6 months of silence that followed the inquiry, and I didn't ask her to, because I understood by then that some kinds of forgiveness aren't apologies at all, they're just 2 people finally willing to sit at the same table again. She asked me, instead, to help her write the new manual inspection protocol into Spill Sync's operating charter, permanently, not as a replacement for the automated system, which she still believed in, and which I'd come to trust more than I once had, but as a mandatory, unautomatable check built into the basin's governing law itself, immune to any future budget cycle or renewal deadline that might otherwise be tempted to quietly phase it out. The seal doesn't care about your confidence interval, I told her, the way I'd told her 100 times before, except this time she almost smiled when I said it, instead of looking away. The reservoir is still there behind Cascade Ridge Dam, still holding its 11 billion gallons, still breathing its slow, patient pressure through the concrete under anyone's boots who cares to stand there and feel it. It doesn't know or care whether the gate holding it back is managed by a woman in a control room reading a dashboard, or an old man on a catwalk with a flashlight and 40 years of calluses, because in the end, water has never once cared about anyone's confidence interval,